Family is supposed to be your anchor, the one truth you never question. But what happens when the person you idolize is a lie? This is a raw confession of love, trust, and a betrayal that shatters everything. My name is Kevin, 35, a mechanic living in Denver, Colorado. My life's always been about fixing things, cars, mostly. There's something satisfying about taking a busted engine, all grit and chaos, and making it hum again. My hands are calloused, my coverall's stained, but the garage is where I feel alive. Growing up, though, the one thing that grounded me even more than my work was my older brother, Mark. He's 38 now, 3 years older than me, and to me, he was a damn superhero. When our dad bailed when I was 10, leaving mom drowning in bills and heartbreak, Mark stepped up. At 13, he became the man I looked up to, the one who made me believe we'd survive. Mark was everything I wasn't: tall, broad, with this calm confidence that could quiet a room. He'd sit with me on our rickety porch in the Denver suburbs, tossing a football, promising me things would get better. I'd nod, hanging on his every word. We'd spend weekends in the garage, wrenching on our old Ford pickup, grease smudged on our faces. He taught me how to change spark plugs, how to listen for a misfire, how to be patient when a bolt wouldn't budge. After, we'd crack open a couple of beers, even when I was too young to legally drink, and he'd tell stories, funny ones about his construction crew or quiet ones about dreams he had for us. Those moments felt sacred, like we were building something bigger than just a fixed car. Mom leaned on him hard too. She was a nurse, pulling night shifts at the hospital, her eyes always tired but kind. Mark was her rock, cooking spaghetti when she was too beat, making sure I didn't skip school, even helping with her taxes once he got older. We were a unit, the three of us, scraping by but tight. Mark was the glue, the one who never flinched, no matter how tough things got. I never doubted him. Why would I? He was the brother who'd sneak me into movies, who punched a bully for me in 7th grade, who always had my back. But there were things I didn't see, or maybe didn't want to. Mark never talked about his life before we moved to Denver when I was 8. Questions about old friends or his first school got brushed off with a shrug or a quick subject change. I figured it was just him being private, maybe still raw from dad leaving. Once, when I was 16, I found an ID in his jacket, some guy named Michael Reed. It had Mark's face, but I laughed when I asked him about it. Old fake ID for bars, he said, grinning. I bought it because he was Mark, and Mark didn't lie to me, at least. That's what I told myself. Last spring, everything started to crack. I was at the shop, knee-deep in a busted transmission, when a guy in a wrinkled suit walked in. He looked like he belonged in an office, not a garage. "You Kevin?" he asked, holding up a photo. It was Mark, no question. But he called him Michael Reed. My heart thudded. I mumbled that I didn't know any Michael, but my voice cracked, and he noticed. He said he was a PI, that Michael was wanted for something serious, tracked through a speeding ticket. From last year, I forced a laugh, said it was a mix-up, but my hand shook as I tightened a bolt. That night, I lay awake, Mark's laugh echoing in my head, his real laugh, the one that made me feel safe. But that ID, that name, the PI's words, they clawed at me. I told myself it was nothing, that Mark was still my brother, still the guy who'd carried me through. But something in my gut whispered I was wrong, and I wasn't ready for how deep that truth would cut. I couldn't shake the PI's visit, that photo of Mark, the name Michael Reed. The way the guy's eyes bored into me, it clung to me like damp cold. For days, I tried to bury it. I'd torque bolts, blast classic rock in the garage, anything to drown out the questions. Mark was my brother, the guy who'd taught me how to drive stick, who'd stayed up with me when I was 14 and crying over dad's latest no-show. He couldn't be some fugitive. It didn't add up. But that ID I'd seen years ago, the one I'd laughed off, kept creeping into my thoughts. Why had he kept it? Why did some stranger have his picture? I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom. Not my buddy Dave at the shop. Mom's heart was fragile enough. She'd had a scare with high blood pressure last year, and I wasn't about to stress her out over what could be a mistake, but the doubt was eating me alive. Every time I saw Mark, I studied him, searching for something off. He came by the house that weekend, same as always, with a six-pack and a grin. "Kevin, you look like you've been wrestling a carburetor and losing," he teased, tossing me a beer. I forced a laugh, but it felt hollow. His voice, his easy slouch, the way he ruffled my hair like I was still a kid, it was all so normal. too normal. I started digging, just small stuff at first. I checked his social media, but Mark barely used it. Just a few photos of job sites or him fishing at the lake. Nothing screamed fugitive. Then I remembered the speeding ticket the PI mentioned. I didn't have access to that kind of record, but I knew someone who might. My old high school buddy, Nate, worked at the DMV. I called him, kept it casual. Said I was helping a friend with a ticket mix-up. Can you look up a name? Michael Reed, maybe in his late 30s. Nate grumbled but agreed to check. A day later, he texted me a screenshot. The ticket was from last fall, issued to a Michael Reed, with an address I didn't recognize, an apartment across town. The birth date didn't match Mark's, but the photo was him. My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe it was a glitch, a stolen ID, anything but the truth, but I couldn't keep pretending. That night, I drove to Mark's place, a small rental house on the edge of Denver. He was in his garage, tinkering with a motorcycle. Classic rock playing low. He looked up, smiling. Hey, Kev, what's up? You look like hell. I didn't smile back. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone, showed him the screenshot. Who's Michael Reed? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. Mark froze, just for a second, but it was enough. His eyes flickered, not with anger, but something worse, guilt. What are you talking about? He said, wiping his hands on a rag, but his voice wasn't steady like usual. I told him about the PI, the photo, the ticket. I expected him to laugh, to say it was some dumb mistake. Instead, he looked away, out toward the street, like he was calculating something. It's not what you think, he said finally, but it sounded weak, like he didn't believe it himself. I pushed harder. Then tell me what it is, Mark, because right now, it looks like you're not who you say you are. My voice cracked, and I hated it. I hated how small I felt, like I was 10 again, begging him to fix something I didn't understand. He didn't answer, just stood there, the wrench in his hand forgotten. The silence was worse than any lie. I realized that I wasn't just angry, I was scared. Scared that the brother I'd built my whole life around might be someone I never knew at all. The air in Mark's garage felt thick, like the weight of his silence was choking me. I stood there, phone still in my hand, the screenshot of that speeding ticket burning a hole in my pocket. Mark wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the motorcycle he'd been working on, like it could somehow fix this, say something. I snapped, my voice louder now, echoing off the concrete. Tell me this is a mistake, Mark. Tell me you're not this Michael Reed guy. He set the wrench down, slow, deliberate, and finally met my eyes. It's complicated, Kev, he said, his voice low. Almost a whisper. Complicated? That word hit me like a slap. My brother, the guy who'd carried me through every rough patch of my life, was dodging me with complicated? I stepped closer, my hands balling into fists. Complicated how? A PI's got your face on a wanted list. You gonna tell me what's going on? Or do I have to guess? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair, the same way he did when he was stressed about a job or mom's hospital bills. But this wasn't that. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said. Yeah, I'm Michael Reed. Or I was a long time ago. My heart stopped, just like that. He admitted it. No fight, no denial, just those words that ripped the ground out from under me. I stared at him, waiting for more, but he just leaned against the workbench, like confessing he was a stranger was no big deal. What does that even mean? I asked, my voice shaking. Who the hell are you? He started talking, his words careful, like he was picking his way through a minefield. He said he'd gotten into trouble years ago, before I was old enough to remember much. A robbery, he called it, but he didn't give details, just said it was a stupid choice, and he'd been running from it ever since. He swore he'd changed, that he'd built a new life here, that he was still my brother, no matter what name he used. I didn't lie about who I am to you, he said, his eyes pleading. Not the important stuff. But it was a lie. Every moment we'd shared, every beer, every late night talk, every time he'd promised we'd be okay, was built on a foundation of secrets. I thought of Mom, how she'd trusted him, how she'd bragged to her friends about her good son. I thought of the nights I'd spent idolizing him, wanting to be half the man he was. You're a fugitive, I said, the word tasting like bile. You've been lying to us for years. How's that not important? Mark flinched, but he didn't argue. I wanted to protect you, he said. You and Mom. If I told you, it'd put you at risk. Protect us? I wanted to scream. All he'd done was make me question every memory we had. I asked him what he'd done, what this robbery was, but he shook his head. It's better if you don't know, he said. Trust me. Trust him? I almost laughed. Trust was the one thing I didn't have left. I left his place that night, my head spinning. I drove around Denver for hours, past the bars we used to hit, the park where we played catch as kids. I kept thinking about that fake ID, the way he'd brushed it off when I was 16. Had he been laughing at me then, knowing I'd bought his story? I didn't tell Mom. She'd been through enough, and I couldn't break her heart until I knew more. But I couldn't let this go either. Michael, whoever he was, had left me with a hole where my trust used to be. I needed answers, even if they hurt. By the time I got home, I knew I had to find that PI again. Whatever Mark was hiding, I wasn't going to let it stay buried. I barely slept after leaving Mark's place. His words, I'm Michael Reed, or I was kept looping in my head, each one a jab to the gut. My brother, the guy I'd put on a pedestal my whole life, was a liar, a fugitive. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I thought I knew him. The time he taught me to fish, the way he'd hug Mom after her long shifts, the late-night talks about nothing and everything. Were any of those real? Or was it all part of his act? I felt like I was drowning in questions, and the only way out was to find that PI. The next morning, I called the number on the card the guy had left. His name was Greg Harper, and he agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near my garage. I got there early, my hands sweaty around a cup of black coffee I barely touched, when Harper showed up. He looked just as out of place as before, cheap suit, tired eyes, like he'd seen too many stories like mine. You ready to talk now? He asked, sliding into the booth. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. I didn't want to betray Mark. Not really, but I needed to know who he was. Harper laid it out plain. Michael Reed was wanted for a credit union robbery in Ohio 12 years ago, armed robbery, no one hurt. But the take was big, over $200,000. They'd never caught him. But a recent speeding ticket in Denver flagged a facial recognition hit. Harper had been hired by the credit union's insurance company to track him down. Your brother's been careful, he said. New name, new life. But he slipped up with that ticket. I sat there, numb, trying to picture Mark. Mark, holding up a bank. It didn't fit. The guy who'd bandaged my scraped knees, who'd split his last dollar with me, wasn't a criminal, or was he? I asked Harper for proof, something more than a photo and a ticket. He pulled out a file, grainy security footage stills from the robbery. The guy in the mask was Mark's height, his build, but the eyes were what got me. I'd know those eyes anywhere. I wanted to throw up. What happens if you find him? I asked. Harper shrugged. He faces charges, prison, probably. Depends on the deal he cuts. I thought of Mom, how she'd crumble if she knew. I hadn't told her anything yet, and I wasn't sure I could. She'd always called Mark her steady one, the son who kept us together. This would kill her. I left the coffee shop with Harper's card and a knot in my chest. Part of me wanted to warn Mark, to give him a chance to run again. But the other part, the part that was pissed, hurt, betrayed, wanted him to face it. I drove to the shop. But work couldn't distract me. Every car I fixed felt like a lie, like I was pretending my life hadn't just imploded. I kept seeing Mark's face, that guilty flicker in his eyes when I'd confronted him. He hadn't even fought to explain. Just fed me some line. About protecting us. Protecting us from what? The truth? By evening, I was back at his place, banging on the door. No answer. I let myself in with the spare key he kept under a rock. The house was too quiet. No tools scattered. No beer cans on the counter. His closet was half empty. Just a few shirts left hanging. My heart sank. Mark was gone. He'd packed up and vanished, just like Dad. I sat on his couch, head in my hands, trying to figure out what I'd say to Mom. How do you tell someone their son's a ghost? Worse, how do you admit you're grieving someone who might never have existed? I wasn't ready to give up, though. Mark owed me answers, and I was going to find him. Finding Mark's place empty hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. I sat on his couch for hours that night, surrounded by the ghosts of our memories, his laugh, the way he'd crank the radio while we worked on his bike. The half-empty closet told me he'd run. Just like he had 12 years ago from whatever mess he'd made in Ohio. I wanted to hate him for it. for leaving me to clean up his lies, but part of me still ached for the brother I thought I knew. I couldn't let go. Not yet. I needed to find him, to hear the whole truth, even if it broke me. The next day, I called in sick to the garage. My boss, Tony, didn't buy it. He knew I never missed work, but I didn't care. I started with what I had, Harper's card and that speeding ticket address. It was a long shot. But I drove to the apartment complex across town, a rundown place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. The manager, a guy with a cigarette dangling from his lip, barely looked up when I asked about Michael Reed. Moved out months ago, he said, shrugging. Paid cash, kept to himself. No forwarding address, no nothing. I stood in the parking lot, staring at the empty unit, feeling like I was chasing a shadow. Back home, I tore through my own memories for clues. Mark had always been cagey about certain things, never had a bank account, always paid for stuff in cash, never let me visit his job sites. I thought it was just him being private. But now it screamed of someone covering tracks. I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. This is Mark. Leave a message. Hearing his voice twisted the knife deeper, I left a message anyway. My voice raw. Mark, it's me. Just tell me why. Don't do this to me again. Keeping this from Mom was killing me. She called that afternoon, asking why I sounded off. Just tired. I lied, hating how easy it was to hide the truth. She was planning a family dinner for Sunday, said Mark promised to bring his famous chili. I mumbled something about him being busy, my chest tight. If she knew he was gone, that he was Michael Reed, it'd destroy her. She'd already lost Dad. Losing Mark would be worse. I couldn't do that to her, not until I had answers. I went back to Harper. Meeting him again felt like crossing a line, like I was betraying Mark for real this time. But I was done with half-truths. Over coffee, I told him Mark had skipped town. Harper didn't seem surprised, just jotted something in his notebook. He's good at disappearing, he said, but he'll slip up again. He asked if I'd help. Maybe share places Mark might go. I hesitated. Helping Harper meant turning my brother in, maybe sending him to prison. But staying silent meant letting his lies fester. I gave him a few spots, our old fishing lake, a bar we liked. It felt like selling a piece of my soul. Driving home, I kept thinking about what Mark said. I wanted to protect you. Protect me from what? The truth that he was a criminal? The shame of knowing my hero was a fraud? I stopped at a gas station, just to sit in my truck and breathe. A photo was tucked in my visor, me and Mark at my high school graduation, his arm around me, both of us grinning. I wanted to rip it up, but I couldn't. Instead, I cried. Right there in the parking lot, for the brother I'd lost twice, once to his lies, and now to wherever he'd run. I wasn't sure what I'd do if I found him, but I knew I couldn't stop looking. Not yet. The days after Mark vanished blurred into a haze of anger and guilt. I'd wake up, check my phone for a call or text that never came, then head to the garage, where every wrench I turned felt like a betrayal. I was chasing my own brother, helping a PI hunt him down. But I couldn't stop. I needed to know why he'd lied, why he'd let me build my life around a man who didn't exist. At the same time, I missed him, missed his dumb jokes, the way he'd call me Kev with that half smirk. It was like grieving someone who was still alive. I kept up the act for Mom. Sunday dinner came, and I told her Mark had a last-minute job out of town. She bought it. But her smile was tight, like she sensed something was off. I hated lying to her, hated how it made me feel like Mark, hiding the truth to protect her. She set an extra plate at the table anyway, like he might walk through the door with his chili pot and a grin. I choked down her meatloaf, my stomach in knots, wondering where he was. Was he still Michael Reed out there, starting over again? Or was he scared, alone, regretting leaving me behind? Harper called me midweek with a lead. A gas station clerk outside Boulder had recognized Mark's photo from a flyer Harper sent out, said a guy matching his description bought cigarettes and a burner phone 2 days ago. Boulder was only an hour away. Close enough to feel real, but far enough to sting. Why hadn't he reached out? I drove up there that evening, the mountains looming like a wall between me and the truth. The gas station was a dingy pit stop, fluorescent lights buzzing. The clerk, a kid barely out of high school, pointed to a security camera. That's him, he said, showing me grainy footage of a man in a hoodie. It was Mark, same broad shoulders, same way he tilted his head. My chest ached. I asked the clerk if he'd said anything, gone anywhere, didn't talk much. The kid said, paid cash, left fast. I stood there, staring at the screen, feeling like I was watching a stranger. Harper wanted to stake out Boulder, but I wasn't sure I could stomach it. Handing Mark over felt like cutting the last thread tying us together. But letting him run felt like betraying myself, like admitting his lies didn't matter. I drove to our old fishing lake instead, a place we'd gone as kids. I sat on the shore, skipping rocks, remembering how Mark taught me to flick my wrist just right. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why he'd thrown us away. When I got home, there was a voicemail, not from Mark, but from Nate at the DMV. He dug deeper, against my advice, and found something weird. The speeding ticket wasn't the only hit on Michael Reed. There was a marriage license from 15 years ago, filed in Ohio. Under that name, Mark, or Michael, had been married. He'd never mentioned a wife, not once. My head spun. Who was this woman? Did she know his secrets? Was she part of the robbery? I called Harper, my voice shaking, and told him about the license. He said it could be a lead to track Mark's movements before Denver. You sure you want to keep going? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Every step I took pulled me further from the brother I loved and closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. I lay awake that night, the voicemail replaying in my mind. A wife, another life Mark had hidden. I thought of Mom, oblivious, planning her next dinner for a son who might never come back. I was torn between finding him and letting him go, between love and justice. But one thing was clear, the Mark I knew was slipping away, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get him back. The marriage license Nate found haunted me. Mark, my Mark, the guy who'd taught me how to throw a punch and change a tire, had been married. He'd never breathed a word about a wife, not in all the years we'd spent sharing beers and secrets, or at least, I thought we'd shared secrets. Now, every memory felt like a half-truth, like I'd been living in a house with walls I couldn't see. I sat in my truck outside the garage, staring at the photo of us from my graduation, his arms slung around me like nothing could break us. Who was he back then? Who was I to him? I called Harper the next morning, my voice hoarse from another sleepless night. I told him about the license. This woman named Sarah Bennett listed as Michael Reed's wife, married in Ohio 15 years ago, just a few years before the robbery. Harper said he'd dig into it, see if Sarah was still around, maybe even tied to Mark's current whereabouts. This could be big, Kevin, he said. People don't just vanish without leaving threads. I didn't know if I wanted to pull those threads. What if they unraveled everything, Mom, me, the life we'd built? But I couldn't stop now. I needed to know who Mark really was. Harper got back to me 2 days later. Sarah Bennett was still in Ohio, living in a small town outside Cleveland. Divorced from Michael Reed 13 years ago. Right around the time of the robbery, Harper had her address. Said she might know something about where Mark went after. I didn't want to face her. Didn't want to hear about a life my brother had lived without us. But I booked a flight anyway. I told Mom I was visiting a friend. Another lie that burned my throat. She hugged me. Said to bring Mark next time. I nodded, my chest tight, wondering if I'd ever see him again. Cleveland was gray and cold when I landed. Sarah's house was a modest split level, kids' bikes in the yard. I knocked, my heart pounding like I was 10 again, waiting for Mark to fix something broken. She answered, mid-40s, tired eyes, but kind. When I said I was looking for Michael Reed, her face hardened. Who are you? She asked. I told her I was his brother, Kevin, and her eyes widened, like she hadn't known he had a brother. That hurt more than I expected. She let me in, offered coffee, but I could tell she was guarded. Sarah didn't know much about where Michael was now. They'd been married young, she said, barely 22, and it fell apart fast. He was charming but restless, always chasing something she couldn't understand. She didn't know about the robbery until after they split. When the cops came asking, he left one night and never came back, she said, her voice flat. I thought he was running from me. Guess it was bigger than that. I showed her a recent photo of Mark, and she nodded. That's him. Older, but him. I asked if he'd ever mentioned a family, a brother. She shook her head. He said he was alone. Alone. That word cut deeper than anything. All those years, Mark had been my anchor, my hero, and he'd erased me from his past. I thanked Sarah, left her my number in case she heard from him, and drove to my motel, my head spinning. I kept picturing Mom's face, how she'd light up when Mark walked in. How was I supposed to tell her he'd lived a whole other life? That he'd left another woman the way he'd left us? I felt like I was betraying him by digging, but he'd betrayed me first. Back in my room, I checked my phone. No messages, no sign of Mark, but Harper had texted. Another lead. This time in Wyoming, Mark was still out there, and I was still chasing a ghost, torn between love and the truth. Wyoming felt like chasing a mirage. Harper's lead came from a truck stop cashier who'd seen a guy matching Mark's description. Same build, same quiet way of moving, buying a coffee and a map a week ago. I didn't want to go. The trip to Ohio had left me raw. Sarah's words. He said he was alone, still echoing like a wound that wouldn't close. But I couldn't stop. Mark was out there. And every day I didn't find him felt like another day he was slipping further into Michael Reed, leaving Kevin, his brother, behind. I took a week off work, told Tony it was personal. He didn't push, just gave me a look that said he knew I was carrying something heavy. I drove to Wyoming, the road stretching endless under a gray sky. The truck stop was outside Cheyenne, a dusty place with flickering lights and truckers nursing cheap coffee. I showed the cashier Mark's photo, and she nodded. Yeah, he was here, didn't say much, just stared at that map like it held all the answers. She didn't know where he went, but I felt him close, but untouchable, like a shadow I could never catch. I spent days driving through small towns, checking motels, bars, anywhere Mark might have stopped. Every dead end chipped away at me. I kept thinking about Mom, how I dodged her calls since Ohio. She'd left voicemails, her voice bright but brittle, asking when Mark was coming home. I couldn't tell her he was a fugitive, that he'd been married, that he'd erased us from his past. It'd break her, and I was barely holding myself together. At night, in some cheap motel, I'd stare at my phone, tempted to call Harper and tell him to stop looking, let Mark run, let Michael Reed disappear. But I couldn't, not yet. On the third day, I found something. A pawn shop clerk in Laramie recognized Mark's photo, said he'd sold a watch, a cheap one, but engraved with to M from K. I'd given it to him for his 30th birthday, saved up for months to buy it. My throat closed up as the clerk handed me the receipt. Mark had been here, and he'd sold a piece of us for $50. I drove to a nearby diner, sat in a booth, and cried like I hadn't since I was a kid. The watch was proof. He wasn't just running from the law. He was running from me. I called Harper, told him about the watch. He said he'd keep searching, but his voice was softer now, like he knew this was more than a case. You don't have to do this, Kevin, he said. You can let him go. Let him go. The words felt like a betrayal, but they also felt like freedom. I thought of Mark's face, the way he looked at me in his garage, guilty but distant. He'd chosen to leave, to keep his secrets over our bond. I'd spent my life idolizing him, building him up as the brother who'd never let me down. But he had, over and over, and I was the one paying for it. I drove home to Denver, the watch receipt crumpled in my pocket. I didn't know if I'd keep chasing him. Part of me wanted to find him, to demand answers, to make him see what he'd done. But another part, the tired, broken part, wanted to let Michael Reed fade away. Mom was waiting for me, oblivious, her love for Mark untouched by his lies. I wasn't sure I could protect her forever, but I could try. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at the photo of us again, his arm around me, and I realized something. I wasn't chasing Mark anymore. I was chasing the brother I thought he was, and that man was gone.